They've scored fans from the rock, rave and rap camps. Justice tell us about 10 years in the music business. And the ambient sounds that score the virtual escapades of video games are brought to us by Japan's foremost composers on a pit stop here in Paris. First, they made a name for themselves, mashing up disco, synth and even heavy metal. Justice have been ambassadors for French electro for a decade now. Famed for their wild live shows and rock and roll exploits, the duo tell France 24's Louise Dupont about taking a more grown-up approach to touring and how the band stormed the States almost by accident.
Hello, thanks for joining us. You're celebrating 10 years in the business now. How does that feel?
Okay, fine. Not feeling too old, even after 10 years of doing concerts.
To mark the anniversary, you've released a new live album. It's called Women Worldwide. And if I'm not mistaken, it's a live album, but without an audience. Can you explain?
Well, it's not that complicated. It was recorded live because that was the only way we had of recording it. And it includes different versions of our album tracks. In short, it's a sort of Justice greatest hits with some new versions of each song.
I read that you think of your music as reflecting a certain time period. Electronic music is perhaps not the first genre we think of in terms of getting a message across. You could have chosen a more lyric-heavy approach, for example. So why did you choose electro from the outset?
We didn't really choose electro.
Electro chose us, more like.
Yes, it chose us. It's more about the creative process than a style for us.
It was actually convenience. It was the best way to make a record from A to Z without having to go into the studio and avoiding having to call on other people with other skills. So we were able to make an album at home using just a few machines and our computers.
Across the Universe. Romain Gavras made a documentary Across the Universe 10 years ago, which revealed how wild and intense your touring schedule could be. What was your experience of doing those concerts?
It's not the same as 10 years ago, because 10 years ago we were just blind drunk, to be honest. So our experience was that of someone who was drinking a lot, and now we drink less. So for myself, I don't know if it feels the same as then. But when the concert starts, it's almost like an out-of-body experience, and then snap. I'm back at the end when the concert's over, but you do have to find that balance between, at the same time, intense concentration and not being too self-conscious, because that's when you start messing up.
The film's also a portrait of a generation who like to party. Sometimes partying to extreme. How do you feel now? Are you still representative of that crowd who comes to your concerts?
No, not at all.
No, not at all, because we're not 20 years old anymore and we're fine with that. We make the music that suits us, that suits our age. And it turns out that that sort of music goes down well with people who are aged between, say, 15 and 40. So we're really happy that we're acquiring new fans.
Your last tour was mainly outside of France. About 3/4 of it, more or less. How do you explain your international success?
I'm not sure there is an explanation. We were very lucky. I think, especially for North America, we were in the right place at the right time. We made a record that captured the imagination of young Americans in the middle of the 2000s. I think it was the sort of music that their parents hated. I think that was a part of it. There was a whole scene of people doing wild party stuff, and the stars aligned. So it worked out in the end.
So coming full circle, in 10 years' time, where do you see yourselves?
In a retirement home by the sea. No, I don't know. 10 years ago, we had no idea what. When we made our first track, we didn't know we were going to make a second one. And then we didn't know if we'd make a third, or an album. Everything happened one step at a time, really. Actually, I thought we would have made more albums by now.
Yes, you've only made 3.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's a good thing that we took our time. Maybe in 10 years' time, we will have made another 2 or 3 records.
We hope so. Thank you very much for joining us, Justice.
It's not a genre you'll necessarily stumble across in a record store, but for many people, video game music was the soundtrack to their childhoods. Like its fans, that sound has now grown up and it's being taken much more seriously. The Diggin in the Carts music tour celebrates the unique electronic music that's evolved around gaming. France 24's Ellen Gainsford and Jennifer Ben-Brahim met with 2 of Japan's leading composers, Yuzo Koshiro and Motohiro Kawashima, while they were in Paris.
Playing a video game for a live audience. French musician Augé takes centre stage with her Sega Mega Drive, scoring the twists and turns of this monster truck. She's just one of the many electronic artists paying tribute to video game music at the Paris leg of Diggin in the Carts festival, the brainchild of New Zealand-born and Tokyo-based journalist Nick Dwyer.
It was really a project that was born out of wanting to understand more about the men and women that made this music that played such a big part of our childhoods. Incredible, pioneering electronic music.
What started as a podcast became a touring show. Nick Dwyer and his band of artists have graced stages around the world, including London's Royal Albert Hall.
So those original sounds, it's the way that that music was exactly how it was in the game 20, 30 years ago that we wanted to bring to these incredible venues around the world. You have people who are in their 30s and their 40s that grew up with that music, and some of them are bringing their cartridges, some of them are bringing games consoles to be signed, and then you've got young audiences, people in their early 20s who are only discovering it for the first time.
Also on the tour, Japanese duo Yuzo Koshiro and Motohiro Kawashima, the influential composers behind Streets of Rage and Return of Shinobi, cult video games that came out in the 80s and early 90s. Both started out as classically trained musicians.
My mother was a piano teacher, so I used to play piano, violin and cello. But my mother was so strict that it almost made me want to stop composing. Around that time, I began playing video games. In the 1980s, 83 and 84, music for video games was so rich. I bought myself a computer when I was 18 years old and started by copying video game music.
I started out playing piano. I realized at a young age that composing came quite naturally to me.
Musicians from Flying Lotus to Hudson Mohawk and Dizzy Rascal have all drawn inspiration from gaming. But some critics still say video games don't qualify as art. Many of the concert-goers disagree.
It's an artistic experience that brings together graphics, music, and gameplay. It's an art that mixes lots of different forms.
It takes so many different skills to make a video game, whether that's music or graphics, so yes, I think it's an original art form.
Whether they're art or not, video games are certainly big business. The global games market is expected to hit $137 billion in revenues this year.
The Viennese modern age took in philosophy, architecture, literature and music, but it's perhaps its haunting paintings that have become the visual shorthand for the epoch. Egon Schiele was one of the artists who exemplified that school. Originally a protégé of Gustav Klimt, Schiele enjoyed some success in his short life and career and is considered among the earliest exponents of Expressionism. To mark the centenary of his death this month, the Belvedere Museum in Vienna is showing a selection of his pieces. Its director tells us a little more about Schiele's work.
Egon Schiele ist einer der ganz großen Psychologen der österreichischen.
Egon Schiele is one of the great psychologists of Austrian art. What makes Austrian art is its reflection on psychology. It is a glance that penetrates, that shows man in his intimacy. Egon Schiele shows a man like no other artist.
And if you can't make it to Vienna, Egon Schiele's paintings and drawings are also on show here in Paris in an exhibition at the Louis Vuitton Foundation. We're wrapping up the show with a circus spectacular direct from Vietnam. Ter Da takes us to the high plains of the centre of the country, conveying the region's traditions, rituals and use of masks and bamboo, thanks to the acrobats, dancers and musicians from the new Vietnamese circus troupe. That's playing at the Sénart Theatre here in Paris, and then it's on tour in France. We'll leave you with a preview. Remember to check out our website, and you can also keep up with Encore on social media too. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this.
Hello, I'm Grayson Perry, and I'm going to be talking about my new exhibition at La Monnaie in Paris on France 24.
Encore, presented by Eve Jackson on France 24 and France24.com.